Why would the Toronto Wildlife Centre advocate to the City of Toronto to take Twiggy away from the Toronto Boat Show?
Well, I mean, because we love wild animals and we really value their wildness, we don't think it's appropriate to strap a native wild animal to a little water ski and pull it around behind a boat.
David Menzies for Rebel News here in Toronto. Well, folks, I'm standing outside the headquarters for the Toronto Wildlife Centre, and they were in the news recently because, well, if you've ever been to the Toronto International Boat Show, one of the mainstay attractions is Twiggy the Waterskiing Squirrel. But alas and alack, come next year, Twiggy's act shall be no more. You see, the Toronto Wildlife Centre successfully complained to the city that this was, an act of cruelty, something that was bad for the squirrel to endure. By the way, there's been about 10 Twiggy since the act began in 1979. The original Twiggy was actually a squirrel rescue. So in any event, I'm here to speak with the executive director of the Toronto Wildlife Centre. She has agreed to an audio recording of our interview, not a video one. I want to see what the agenda is of the Toronto Wildlife Centre in ending a decades-long act that has brought so much fun to so many people. Let's hear what she has to say. Well, I'm with Natalie Carvonen, and she is executive director of the Toronto Wildlife Centre. And Natalie didn't want to come on camera, but she agreed to be recorded. Natalie, there's a bit of a social media viral story going around right now involving Twiggy the Waterskiing Squirrel. From what I can tell, your center does a lot of good work rescuing distressed and injured animals. Why would the Toronto Wildlife Centre advocate to the City of Toronto to take Twiggy away from the Toronto Boat Show?
Well, I mean, because we love wild animals and we really value their wildness, we don't think it's appropriate to strap a native wild animal to a little water ski and pull it around behind a boat, for entertainment and for profit. We wouldn't think that was appropriate for a hummingbird or an owl or a woodpecker or any other kind of wild animal, or even my cat, to be frank. We just don't think it's really an appropriate thing to do to a wild animal. So that's why we voiced our concerns about that. It's also my understanding that since the late 70s, these squirrels have been provided by a wildlife center in the United States that took them in as orphan babies. And instead of them being raised and released back into the wild, which should be done with orphan squirrels, they were instead trained to be pulled around on a water ski, which we just don't think is appropriate.
Now, Natalie, you've probably forgotten more about animals than I'm ever going to learn. But where I live, I see squirrels galore. They always seem to be in a completely agitated state, trying to find food and trying to avoid becoming food from predators. I look at Twiggy the squirrel, and I'm going, you know what? If I was a squirrel, this is a good gig. I'm getting fed 3 squares a day. I get on the water skis. It doesn't seem to be in any kind of stress. Doesn't this sort of go against your very mandate of saving, injured and distressed wildlife?
Well, no, quite the opposite, actually. So again, we think that a wild animal should be, in a forest, running through trees and jumping on trees and socializing with other squirrels and having baby squirrels and doing normal squirrel things.
Fair enough. And now that you say, a squirrel strapped into water skis is being laughed at, the promoters are making money from it. But when you speak to the people at the Toronto Boat Show, they say this raises awareness of water safety. Do you think that's a valid counter-argument in terms of, getting the message out that, if you go water skiing or boating or what have you, wear a life jacket so you as a human being don't drown?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the argument that it's not a show, it's a workshop about water safety, and no, I don't buy that at all.
But Natalie, I'm concerned about the bigger picture. Is this a kind of animal advocacy that would one day take the position, which PETA already has, that when you look at service animals, seeing eye dogs for the blind, bomb sniffing or drug sniffing dogs that law enforcement use, that this is a form of indentured slavery to these dogs, and that should be banned, even though it would, adversely affect public safety and would definitely affect the way blind people get around.
Yeah, I mean, we're not an animal rights organization, and I don't know a lot about service animals and seeing eye dogs, I mean, I think their role is wonderful, from what I know of it. I mean, but that's different. I mean, to me, it's not entertainment. Somebody's not making a profit because of a silly show that's being put on. They do have a valuable job. My understanding of those service animals is that they live really one-on-one, with who they're servicing, or maybe a family, and they're showered with love and affection, and their lives are actually quite good. So I mean, to me, it's not exactly the same thing, and I certainly don't see ourselves ever taking a position on that.
What about the legions of people that are saying the boat show won't be the same without Twiggy the Waterskiing Squirrel?
There are legions of people who are very upset about Twiggy the Waterskiing Squirrel. Okay. So, I mean, like anything in life, it makes it interesting when people have different opinions. But change is hard, sometimes, and we don't all have to agree on everything. But to me, this has been happening since the 70s. We're a more progressive society now. I think it's about time that we move on from water skiing squirrels.
Natalie, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. Well, there you have it. According to Natalie, boat safety rules can be presented in a manner that doesn't involve a water skiing squirrel, albeit it'll be far less fun to learn about boating safety, I imagine, by not seeing Twiggy the water skiing squirrel. And it should be noted that the ban Twiggy movement is spreading. Vancouver has told the boat show people that Twiggy will no longer be allowed to perform at that city's boat show. I find it distressing in a way, folks. I think a squirrel, a rodent, for goodness sakes, that is being treated very well, not being ill-treated, has to be banned. And secondly, although Natalie doesn't subscribe to this, thank goodness, does this not pave the way for more animal activism? I know PETA is against the idea of seeing eye dogs. Can you imagine that? Easy for a sighted person to say, isn't it, that the blind should be deprived of their dogs? But I think that's despicable, and I think it's part of a growing lunatic fringe trend when it comes to animal rights. For Rebel News, I'm David the Menzoid Menzies. Hey folks, have you heard? Rebel News is going on a cruise. Please go to rebelnewscruise.com, and I hope to see you on our luxury liner come July as we head north to Alaska.